The first time Elena Walsh saw him, he was scrubbing footprints off the marble lobby floor like he was erasing something far deeper than dirt. David Hale, the janitor, the single father, and, if the universe were paying any attention, the last person anyone should have underestimated. It was Wednesday. 11:07 a.m. A thin ray of sun had slipped between the glass towers of downtown Seattle, slicing through the atrium like a spotlight on a man who had spent years trying to disappear. Inside Conference Room 4C, laughter erupted. Not the kind that warms a room, but the kind that slices through it like broken glass. Let the janitor try, someone jeered. More chuckles followed, a few claps. Even the guest instructor, an off-duty cop running the company's mandatory corporate safety and self-defense workshop, cracked a half-smile. The vibe was clear. This was entertainment. Comic relief. David looked up from his mop bucket. He had already felt the stares the moment he walked by. Not resentment, not even ridicule. Something colder. Dismissal. He wiped his hands with a towel and prepared to move on until a woman's voice broke through the noise. Elijah. "That's enough," Elena said from the back row. Her voice was calm, but her jaw was tight. Elijah, the regional sales manager with an MBA and a God complex, smirked. "Oh, come on, Ms. HR. It's just a bit of fun. Let's see what the floor guys got." The instructor, sensing a moment of levity or perhaps ego, gestured toward David. "You know any self-defense moves, Sir?" David met his eyes. "A few." Laughter again. Someone actually snorted, but Elena didn't laugh. She watched David carefully. The way he didn't flinch, the way he didn't look embarrassed or angry. He looked still, not passive, controlled. "Come on," the instructor said, waving. "Step up. It's just a demo." David exhaled slowly, set the towel on the bucket, walked toward the center of the room. The group quieted, some out of curiosity, others waiting for something humiliating. David stood across from the instructor, who took a loose stance. "Try to grab me. Let's keep it light." David didn't move. Instead, he asked softly, "Are you right-handed?" The instructor blinked. Yeah." David nodded. "Good. Then I know which side to take." A heartbeat later, everything changed. In a flash, David shifted his weight, stepped in, deflected the instructor's right hand midair, swept his leg, and redirected the man's balance in a seamless, fluid motion, laying him on the mat before anyone had time to gasp. The room froze. It hadn't been violent. It had been graceful, elegant, like something out of a film where the humble old man ends the fight before it begins. The instructor sat up, stunned but smiling. That wasn't basic. David offered a hand. "Didn't want to embarrass you." A few people laughed, but it wasn't mockery this time. It was awe. Something unfamiliar, discomforting. Respect. Elena's eyes didn't leave him, and for the first time that morning, David made eye contact with her. There was a flicker in his gaze, just enough to make her forget for a moment who was the executive and who held the mop. Then he turned and walked back to his cart, as if nothing had happened. That afternoon, the office buzzed. The footage had been caught on someone's phone and was already circulating in group chats. Janitor Jason Bourne, one thread called him, karate custodian, another. But Elena wasn't laughing. She was curious. Something about the way he moved. The way he returned to wiping scuff marks from the hallway as if he hadn't just flipped a trained cop like a sack of groceries. Most people hide weakness. David Hale hid strength. She found herself pulling up his employee file. Nothing unusual. Background check cleared, listed as a former martial arts instructor in a private gym a decade ago. No LinkedIn, no Facebook, just a home address in a quiet suburb and a dependent listed Noah Hale, age 10. That night, Elena stood in front of her window city lights blinking like distant stars and wondered, what was a man like that doing here? The next morning, the elevator doors opened to reveal David already inside, standing quietly in the corner with his cleaning cart. Elena hesitated. He held the door open button without looking up. "Thanks," she said, stepping in. Silence filled the small space. After a long beat, David spoke. "Sorry about yesterday." She blinked. "Sorry, didn't mean to cause a scene. I know it wasn't part of the schedule." Elena shook her head. "You didn't cause the scene. You just flipped it on its head." He cracked the faintest smile. She continued. "You were good, really good. That wasn't just a few self-defense classes." David didn't answer. She turned slightly. "You were a professional, weren't you?" Another pause. Then, softly, "Once." The elevator pinged open. He didn't say more. But as he pushed his cart away, Elena watched him go, wondering why a man with that kind of training had chosen to clean floors instead of command rooms. And deep inside, something told her she hadn't just witnessed a moment. She'd opened the first page of a story, and it was far from over. There was something about a man who didn't explain himself. Especially in a world where everyone overshared, overposted, and overspoke, David Hale's silence was deafening in a way that made Elena curious and careful. The morning after the karate incident, the office hummed like a hive of restrained chaos. The video clip, less than 10 seconds, had been sent around so many Slack channels it reached the C-suite by sunrise. Some watched it with disbelief, others with amusement. But not Elena. She watched it 3 times alone in her office. Not because of the move, not even the precision. It was the expression, stillness, focus, and then the flicker. A brief, near imperceptible wince at the end, like the part of him that had delivered the move regretted it, as if he hadn't meant to be seen. She passed him later that morning outside the break room. He was restocking paper towels, sleeves, rolled up forearms, freckled with old scars and quiet strength. Elena slowed. "Morning," she said. David looked up. "Ms. Walsh, Elena's fine." A small nod. "Morning, Elena." They stood there for a moment, just long enough for the hum of the vending machine to feel like a third person in the conversation. She gestured at the closet he was working in. "I guess you're everyone's favorite employee now." He half smiled. "Until the next guy brings in donuts." "You're modest." He gave a shrug. "You're kind." Then he gathered his supplies and wheeled the cart toward the maintenance hallway. Elena took a step, then paused. "David," she said gently, "you've done this a long time." "Cleaning floors?" he asked without stopping. "No," she said, hiding in plain sight. He turned just enough for her to see his eyes. A pause, a smile without humor, and then he was gone. Later that week, Elena found herself digging. Not in a corporate way. No emails flagged, no HR violations, just curiosity. She asked around casually. When did he start? Anyone know where he came from? Most of the answers were vague. He's been here a while. Quiet guy. Always first to arrive, last to leave. Never complains. Drinks tea, not coffee. Weird, right? But one thing stood out every time something went wrong in the building. A flickering light, a busted vent, a tripped breaker. David showed up, even before the alert ticket was filed. It was like he knew. Friday, 6:42 p.m. Most employees had gone home. Elena was reviewing budget notes when the lights in her office flickered once then again. Then everything went black. She waited. Nothing. She reached for her phone just as a knock sounded on the glass. David, holding a small flashlight. Not blinding, just enough to light his face cast half in shadow. "System's down," he said. "But it's just this floor." Fuse tripped. "Of course you know that," she smiled, standing. "You always know." "I listen to buildings," he said softly. She tilted her head. "You make them sound alive." "They are. You can hear things if you stay quiet enough." Elena hesitated, then followed him into the hallway. It was empty, silent, bathed in the blue glow of the emergency strips along the baseboards. "Do you always stay late?" she asked. "Do you?" he returned. She smiled. "Touché." They reached the electrical room. David moved with practiced efficiency. He checked 2 switches, adjusted 1. Should come back on in 10 seconds. Elena leaned lightly against the door frame. "Can I ask you something personal?" He paused. "You can try. What did you do before this?" There was a moment, a long one, where he didn't move, didn't speak. The air between them thickened. Then he said, "I worked with people, helped them prepare for danger. Not all of them listened." Elena caught the shadow that passed behind his eyes, and now she asked. "I clean up after them." They walked back down the hallway in silence. The lights flicked back to life. Fluorescent hum returned, but something had shifted. As they neared the elevators, Elena said quietly, "You know, sometimes people don't stop because they're afraid. They stop because they've been forced to." David didn't answer, but the look he gave her then, half-guarded, half-grateful, was enough. That night, Elena sat on the edge of her bathtub robe, pulled tight around her, staring at a glass of wine she hadn't touched. Her reflection in the mirror looked tired. Human. She thought of her ex-husband, his loudness, his temper, his desperate need to control every room. David was the opposite. No noise, no ego, and yet when things went wrong, David moved. Not to dominate, but to protect. The next day, she walked into the building early. Too early. She didn't expect to see anyone in the lobby, but there he was, mopping. Slow, steady strokes across the tile. She didn't want to interrupt, so she waited. David looked up without surprise. "Miss Walsh?" "Elena," she reminded him. He nodded once. "I was just—" She began, then stopped. "I don't really know why I came in early." He gave the smallest smile. "Sometimes quiet is reason enough." She looked down. Her voice gentled. "Do you ever miss who you were?" He didn't answer right away. Then softly, "Every day, but I don't miss what it cost." And then, just before she turned to go, she said, "You may think you're invisible here, David, but I see you." The words hung between them like a fragile truth. He didn't thank her. He didn't smile. He just nodded. But for the first time since she'd met him, Elena saw something different in his eyes. He believed her. The sound of a man breathing through nightmares is nothing like snoring. It's quieter, shallower, like he's trying not to be heard even in sleep. David Hale woke up before the alarm, drenched in sweat. The bedsheets were tangled around his legs like restraints. He sat up, shoulders tense, chest rising and falling too fast for 5:38 a.m. Outside his window, the Seattle rain whispered against the glass like an old ghost. He looked over at the small twin bed across the room. Noah was still curled up in it, mouth slightly open, holding a flashlight like a stuffed animal. He'd been reading comic books after lights out again. David exhaled. Stood. He moved through the dark like someone trained to avoid creaks in floorboards because he had been. In the kitchen, he washed his face in cold water and stared at himself in the reflection of the microwave door. His eyes were rimmed with red, not from sleep deprivation, but from memories. Memories that didn't stay where they belonged. Some shadows don't just follow you. They live inside you. Later that morning, while the office was still yawning into life, Elena found herself downstairs again. It wasn't planned. Not really. But ever since that conversation in the hallway, the one where David finally let her see a sliver of who he used to be, she hadn't been able to stop thinking about him. Not romantically, at least, not yet, but profoundly. Like when you hear a song for the first time and it echoes something you've always felt but never said out loud. She passed by the front desk just as David was signing for a delivery, some new part for the boiler system. He looked up, caught her gaze, and nodded once. Nothing more. But something had changed between them. There was an unspoken thread, thin and fragile but undeniably there. That afternoon, Elena's curiosity outpaced her caution. She called an old friend, a woman named Lorna who used to work in vetting for a private security firm. "I need a favor," Elena said. There was a pause. "You're HR Elena. That usually means you give lectures about boundaries, not break them. This is off the record, Elena said. Just personal. Who is he? A janitor, Elena replied. A longer pause. Most people dig because they smell smoke. You're digging because you saw fire, aren't you? Something like that. 2 days later, the file arrived in a brown envelope, no return address. Elena didn't open it right away. She waited until midnight, sitting on her apartment floor, a single glass of red wine untouched beside her. Inside was a 5-page report. Clean, professional. Clinical. David Hale, former U.S. Marine. Special recon. Deployed 3 times. Honorable discharge. Then joined a private security outfit. Classified missions. Then instructor at a tactical defense school. Then nothing. No employment records, no tax filings, just blank space for nearly 3 years. Then reappearance as a janitor at a small charter school. 6 months later, he joined Atlantic Dynamics, the building Elena now managed. And then she saw the name. Alicia Hale. Wife, deceased. Cause of death, blunt force trauma. Domestic dispute. Perpetrator unresolved. Notes, no charges filed. Police report sealed. Elena sat perfectly still, not because she was afraid, but because for the first time, she realized the calm in David wasn't natural. It was earned, forced, forged in fire and locked behind scars no one ever asks about. The next morning, she found him in the stairwell between the 3rd and 4th floor, replacing a loose railing bolt. No one else ever used those stairs. "Morning," she said, voice soft. He nodded without turning. "You're up early. I read something." He didn't react. "I shouldn't have." "I know. But I did." He tightened the last bolt with more force than needed. She stepped closer. "You lost her. Alicia." That made him freeze. He slowly turned his head and the weight in his eyes was crushing. "Don't," he said. "Please." Elena's voice cracked. "You didn't do it, did you?" A long silence. Then, "I didn't stop it fast enough." He sat down on the top stair, rubbed his hands over his face. "She was my world. But I was gone too often, always somewhere else. When I came back, she was already broken. Her brother, he had problems, big ones. I should have kept them apart." He looked up, but I believed in second chances. Until it was too late. Elena sat beside him, silent. David's voice dropped to a whisper. "I didn't kill him, but I didn't save him either. When it happened, when I saw him coming at her, I reacted. He went through a glass table. He died on the way to the hospital. I was cleared, but he didn't finish. Some confessions don't need punctuation. Just breath." She reached over, gently touched his arm. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be," he replied. "Just don't ask me to be that man again, the one who fights. That man costs too much." They sat in silence. Not awkward silence. Healing silence. That evening, Elena walked past the janitor's closet just as David was locking up. She paused. "David, yeah." She smiled gently. "If you ever feel like talking, I'm a good listener." He looked at her, and for the first time, he didn't look away. It started with the lights. Not the overhead fluorescents, they flickered now and then, sure, but it was the exit signs. Bright red, supposed to glow 24/7. One morning, 2 were out. One on the 6th floor and another near the main stairwell. Both batteries drained. A coincidence, they said. Cheap wiring. David Hale didn't believe in coincidences. Not anymore. On Tuesday, the coffee machine in the break room spat out sludge instead of espresso because someone had poured sand into the water tank. Maintenance blamed a faulty filter. David cleaned up the mess without a word, but he knew. This wasn't random. By Thursday, the fire alarm tripped twice false calls each time, but suspicious. Especially the second one, which happened during a private shareholder meeting upstairs. The building had never seen that many VIPs in one place. David began staying later. He walked the halls longer, listened harder. Shadows that once felt still now felt like they moved. But it wasn't just the building cracking. Something else was unraveling. Elena noticed it too. It was in the way people whispered around corners, the way certain keycards suddenly stopped working, files misfiled, a server room left unlocked. Small things, forgettable. But not to David. Not to someone who used to measure risk by the angle of a doorknob or the direction of a breeze. Late one evening, while inspecting a utility closet on the third floor, David found a crowbar tucked behind a stack of supply boxes. Worn, hand-wrapped in electrical tape. The kind of thing you don't forget to return, unless you didn't intend to. He brought it to building security. They shrugged, probably one of the contractors. You know how lazy those guys get. David didn't argue. He never did. But the next morning he checked the cameras himself. Except the footage was gone. He didn't tell Elena right away. Not because he didn't trust her, but because he didn't want her involved. Not yet. Instead, he waited. Waited for the next mistake. Because whoever was behind this was sloppy. Or cocky. Either way, they'd show their hand. 3 days later, they did. It was nearly midnight when David, doing one last pass through the lobby, heard a faint click. Soft. Deliberate. He followed the sound toward the executive offices. The hallway was empty, lights dimmed for energy saving. Another click. Then a shadow moved across the frosted glass of the IT department. David slipped off his shoes. He moved like a water-quiet fluid practiced. When he reached the door, he didn't enter. He listened. Heavy breathing. Gloved fingers tapping at a keyboard. The faint static hum of a portable hard drive being accessed. Then, silence. David stepped back, leaned into the hallway wall just as the door cracked open. A man in a gray hoodie stepped out, careful not to make noise. Mid-30s. Wiry build. A little too confident. David watched. Followed him as he turned the corner, only to bump into the janitor mop and hand expression unreadable. The man froze. Their eyes locked. David said nothing. The man offered a half smile. Late night, huh? David stepped aside. Good night, he said evenly, and let him walk away, but not before catching the edge of a temporary visitor badge clipped inside the hoodie pocket. The next morning, David walked into Elena's office. She was mid-call, but the moment she saw his face, she ended it. Talk to me. David shut the door, locked it, sat down. There's something wrong in your building. Elena's eyes sharpened. Wrong how he told her everything. The exit signs, the coffee machine, the crowbar, the missing camera footage, the man in the hoodie. She listened without interruption. But he could see it in her posture, the shift. The moment a professional lets the instinct kick in. Why didn't you stop him? She asked. David folded his hands. Because if I did, it would become something bigger. Police, press, distraction. We need to know what he was after. Elena exhaled slowly. I'll contact our head of IT. Quietly. See if anything's missing. David stood. Good. But there's something else. What he looked her in the eyes. Calm. Focused. He wasn't alone. That evening, Elena couldn't concentrate. Her office felt too bright. Her computer screen too loud. Every ding of her inbox made her jump. David had dropped a weight into her world. And now, everything tilted. She reviewed badge access logs. Called security. Rewatched camera loops. Most of them were intact, but the ones closest to the IT wing blank spots, corrupted files. Someone was inside the system, and whoever it was knew exactly where to hide. She didn't go home that night. Neither did David. They sat on opposite sides of the break room, each sipping lukewarm tea. The silence between them no longer awkward, but loaded. Finally, Elena asked, "Why didn't you leave this all behind?" After everything. David stared at his cup. Because I can't unsee danger, he said. Even when I try to live a small life, it finds me. It always does. And if it puts you in danger again," he looked up at her, "I'll survive. I'm not worried about me." Elena knew what he meant. Noah. Just after 1:00 a.m. the lights flickered again. Then the fire alarm tripped. David and Elena exchanged one look and ran. The shriek of the fire alarm cut through the still night like a scream through glass. Elena was the first to her feet. David was already moving. They didn't speak, didn't need to. The moment the red strobe lights began to pulse, David scanned the main monitors behind the security desk. Floor maps, status panels, all blinking red, except one. "Elevator 3 is stuck," he said. "Occupied?" Elena asked, breath-catching. David zoomed in. Thermal overlay lit up a small flickering heat signature in the center of the shaft. "Yes." "We're sub-level to lobby," he said. "Mid-lift, between floors." Elena didn't hesitate. "That's Ava, Harper's daughter. She was staying late doing homework in the daycare office." Her voice cracked. David looked at her. "Go to the fire panel. Silence the alarm. It's not a real fire." Elena hesitated. "How do you know his eyes didn't waver?" "Because if it were, I'd smell it." David sprinted. 3 floors down, boots echoing on metal stairs, his breath steady, his focus razor sharp. Every step reactivated muscle memory he'd buried for years. The flick of his heel, the angle of his knee, the way his shoulder turned to brace for impact. By the time he reached Elevator 3, a small group had gathered 2 security guards, 1 maintenance tech, and a panic-stricken Harper Ava's mother. "She's in there," Harper gasped. "She's not answering her phone." David touched her shoulder gently. "I've got her." He turned to the elevator door, knelt to the floor, pulled off the utility access panel. The override switch was unresponsive. Fried. Likely jammed from the false trigger. Whoever staged this knew what they were doing. But they didn't know him. David stood. "We need access to the service ladder. Now." One of the guards shook his head. "Sir, that's not protocol." David cut him off, his voice firm but calm. "Then get someone who writes protocol. Because a child is trapped between floors, and I'm going in." The guard moved. Within 30 seconds, David had harnessed himself to the vertical track. He pried open the shaft door using the emergency bar, then slipped into the dark void. A faint sob echoed up from the cab. "Ava," he called. Silence. Then, Who is it?" "My name is David. Your mom's here. You're safe." The sound of soft crying filled the shaft. "I'm going to drop in, okay? Just a little bump." He reached the top of the elevator car, pried the access hatch open, and eased his body down into the cab. The moment his feet hit the floor, Ava rushed him, arms flung tight around his waist, her face buried in his jacket. David wrapped his arms around her, felt her shaking. "You're all right now," he said gently. "I've got you." 15 minutes later, the power was rerouted, and the cab brought down safely to the lobby. The doors opened with a hiss. Harper rushed in, collapsed to her knees, and pulled Ava into her arms. Both were crying now. Elena stood near the fire panel, hand over her mouth. She watched as David stepped back into the shadows, letting the mother-daughter moment unfold. No need for applause, no desire for praise. He simply exhaled. But Elena's eyes didn't leave him, because she saw what no one else could. That wasn't just an act of rescue, it was an act of redemption. Hours later, after the building had emptied and Ava was home safe, Elena found David in the mechanical room, sitting on an overturned bucket, staring at the floor. "Can't sleep?" she asked softly. "I don't sleep much anyway," he replied. She stepped closer. "You were incredible tonight." David didn't respond. Elena sat beside him, knees nearly touching. The humming of the generator was the only sound between them. "Does it ever get lighter?" he asked finally. "What?" "The weight of being the one who's supposed to stop bad things from happening." Elena's voice broke a little. "I don't know, but I think it's lighter when you don't carry it alone." David looked at her. Really looked. Something passed between them. A moment not built on attraction, but understanding. A bridge forming between two people who knew what it meant to stand in ruins and keep standing anyway. Elena reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a small chocolate bar. "Payment for saving the princess," she said with a smile. David took it, smiled faintly. "That's more than I got in Kabul." She raised an eyebrow. "You just said more about yourself in one sentence than you have in 3 weeks." He looked away quietly, unwrapping the chocolate. "You just ask better questions." Before she left, Elena paused at the door. "You said earlier, it always finds you. The danger." "Yeah." She nodded slowly. "Then I'm glad you're here." David didn't answer, but this time he didn't look away either. Back in her apartment, Elena lay in bed, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling. The world didn't feel safe. Not anymore. Not with elevators jamming, cameras being wiped, and a man in a hoodie slipping through the halls like a ghost. But she realized something else. It wasn't about feeling safe. It was about who you felt safe standing beside. And somehow, in ways she didn't yet understand, that man was David Hale. David wasn't summoned. He was sent for the way people send for furniture they want moved or packages they want returned. It happened Monday morning, less than 72 hours after he'd rescued Ava from the stalled elevator. Word had spread like wildfire. Parents were grateful. Employees praised him in whispers. Security deflected. And somewhere in the boardroom, someone didn't like it. The call came at 8:02 a.m., a simple message on his department tablet report to HR Conference B, immediately. No greeting, no context. David put down his mop and walked. Elena wasn't there. Instead, 3 men in expensive suits were seated in a sterile glass room that smelled like furniture polish and disapproval. The kind of place where apologies were expected and eye contact discouraged. The man in the middle leaned back. "Mr. Hale." David nodded. "You've had quite a week." David said nothing. The man to the right folded his hands. "We've received a number of emails about your heroics." David met his gaze. Calm, measured. "Is there a problem?" "Yes," the man replied. "You." They danced around it at first. "You overstepped protocol. You created liability. You exposed a minor to danger. You're not trained for rescue in this facility. You're not authorized to override elevator safety." David listened. Then, quietly, "So I should have left her there." The room fell into silence. The man on the left cleared his throat. "That's not the point. The point is, we have systems in place. People responsible. You're not one of them." David stood slowly. "I didn't do it for praise. I did it because she was alone." The man in the middle raised an eyebrow. "You understand that further unauthorized actions will lead to termination." David didn't blink. "I don't need this job," he said. Then he walked out. Elena found him in the underground loading dock 30 minutes later, sitting on the tailgate of a service truck with his sleeves rolled up, forearms braced on his knees. "You got called in," she said gently. "I got put in my place," he replied. "I'm sorry." He shook his head. "Don't be. It's not your fault. This isn't the kind of place that likes seeing invisible people become visible." She sat beside him. The cement beneath their feet was cold. The silence between them was colder. After a moment, David said, "I'm thinking of quitting." Elena swallowed. "I'd understand if you did." But she hesitated. Then, "But this place is safer when you're here." He looked at her, searching for sarcasm. He found none. "You shouldn't say things like that," he said. "Why?" "Because I might want to believe you." That night, Elena poured herself a second glass of wine and stared at a photograph on her dresser. Her wedding day. She turned it face down. Then she picked up her phone and typed out a message. "David, I think you were right about danger always finding you. I used to think I'd married a good man, until I tried to leave. She hovered over the send button. Then she hit delete. Some truths were easier left unspoken. The next morning she walked into the building and saw David sweeping the lobby as usual. But there was something different about him. Not in his face. Not even in his posture. It was in his stillness. Like a man who had decided that if the world insisted on misunderstanding him, he would no longer try to explain himself. He didn't need to prove anything. Not anymore. That afternoon, Elena had lunch with her daughter at a nearby park. Just the two of them, sunlight sandwiches and an overdue conversation. Her daughter, 14 and sharp as glass, watched Elena carefully. "You like him," she said. Elena blinked. "Excuse me, the janitor, the one who saved that girl. You talk about him like people talk about movies they've already seen 3 times. Elena chuckled softly. "It's not like that. No, it's hard to explain." Her daughter nodded. "Dad never made you laugh like that, or listen like that, or look like that." Elena set her sandwich down. "You see more than I realize. That's your job. Seeing people. Maybe you should let someone see you." Later that evening, David received a message on his phone. From a number he didn't recognize at first. "Hey, thank you for being kind to my mom. She says you make her feel safe. That's kind of a big deal. K." David stared at the message for a long time. Then, slowly, he smiled. At 9:12 p.m., Elena stood in front of her bathroom mirror brushing her hair when her phone buzzed. One new message. "David, you were right about the weight. It does get lighter when you're not carrying it alone. Thanks for reminding me." Her hands trembled. Not because it was romantic, because it was real. And real was harder to find than anything else these days. The day of the company celebration began like any other: too much coffee, too few parking spots, and emails marked urgent that weren't. David spent the morning setting up folding chairs in the atrium. Balloons hung limp from plastic hooks. A banner read Atlantic Dynamics, celebrating 20 years of innovation. He didn't care for irony. By noon, the catered food arrived. Sushi trays, vegan sliders, mini creme brulees in shot glasses. David mopped around the serving tables while employees buzzed trading gossip between sips of champagne. Elena passed him once wearing a soft blue blouse clipboard in hand, and that quiet, anchored calm he had come to admire more than he cared to admit. "You staying for the speeches?" she asked. He looked up, squinting into the light. "I don't belong in rooms like that." She smiled gently. "Funny. I was just thinking the same thing." The atrium filled fast. Executives took front-row seats. Engineers hovered by the food. Interns recorded everything on their phones. The CEO, a tall woman named Marianne Lynn, stood near the podium rehearsing her lines under her breath. David stood near the exit, watching. Something felt wrong. Not loud, not obvious, but off. There was a man near the back shoulders, hunched hands deep in his pockets, wearing a staff lanyard that didn't match the day's color scheme. David blinked. He recognized him. Martin Kell, former network technician. Quiet, unassuming. Fired 6 months ago for harassment complaints and unauthorized access to secure systems. It had been hushed internally legal cleanup. But Martin shouldn't be here. Not today. Not ever again. David stepped forward. At that exact moment, Elena moved to the podium to introduce the CEO. "Welcome, everyone," she began, voice steady. "We're here to celebrate not just innovation, but community." In the crowd, Martin moved. He reached into his coat pocket. Fast, clumsy, too familiar. David yelled. Down the room froze. Time fractured. Martin drew a weapon, a compact pistol, and raised it toward the stage. Screams erupted. Someone dropped a glass. Chairs scraped. A ripple of terror spread like lightning. But David was already moving. 10 feet. 6. 3. Then the sound of metal against flesh. David's arm swept up with the speed of instinct. His elbow caught Martin beneath the chin hard. The man staggered. The gun fired once into the ceiling. Panic exploded. David grabbed Martin's wrist, twisted it backward, and slammed him face first onto the floor in one smooth motion. The gun skidded across the tile and stopped beneath the CEO's heel. Gasps echoed. Phones recorded. Someone shouted for security, but it was already over. Martin groaned beneath David's knee, disarmed, broken, defeated. The room fell silent. Then applause, reluctant, stunned, then swelling. David didn't move. His face didn't change. His eyes scanned the room like he was still in a battlefield waiting for the next threat. It took Elena's voice to pull him out. David. He looked up, and for the first time, everyone looked at him, not as a janitor, not as background, but as something else entirely. Security took Martin away in handcuffs. Police arrived minutes later. Witness statements were taken. Cell phone videos uploaded before they even left the building. By 4:00 p.m., David's name was trending locally on Twitter. By 5:00 p.m., reporters waited outside the glass doors. By 6:00 p.m., a producer from a national morning show left a voicemail on his flip phone. David ignored it all. He sat alone in the boiler room, the only place left that felt untouched by noise. Elena found him there again. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes soft. "You okay?" she asked. He didn't look at her, just said he could have killed someone. But he didn't, because of you. David leaned back, exhaled through his nose. "You know the worst part." What I didn't hesitate. He looked up at her, and something in his face was haunted. I didn't even think. I just moved, like I was back in a country I never wanted to see again. Elena stepped closer. "You saved lives today. I broke a promise today. What promise to myself? That I'd never be that man again. The one who moves before he thinks. The one who uses violence no matter how justified." She sat beside him carefully. "You didn't use violence, David. You used courage, and you didn't hurt anyone who didn't need to be stopped." He was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Noah's going to see it. It's everywhere already. The footage." Elena nodded. "He'll be proud." David shook his head. "He'll be scared." Later that evening, David walked into his apartment and found Noah sitting cross-legged on the couch watching the clip on YouTube with the volume off. The screen froze on the exact frame where David's elbow met Martin's jaw. Noah looked up. "Was that real?" David nodded. "Did you know he was coming?" "No." Then how David sat beside him. "Sometimes you just know when it's time to stop running." Noah was quiet for a moment. "Then I'm glad you didn't run, Dad." David put his arm around him, held him close, and for the first time in years he let the silence between them heal something. It started with a doorbell. David stood in his kitchen coffee still steeping when the buzzer rang. He checked his watch, 7:04 a.m. Too early for a package, too quiet for trouble. He opened the door and found a young woman holding a microphone camera crew behind her. "Mr. Hale," she said breathlessly, "would you mind answering a few questions?" David blinked. She smiled wider. "You're the janitor from the Atlantic Dynamics incident, right? The one who disarmed the shooter." "No comment," David muttered and shut the door gently but firmly. Noah, still in pajamas, peeked out from the hallway. "Was that a news crew?" David sighed. "Yeah." Noah's eyes lit up. "You're on TV?" David shook his head. "It's not what you think." But it was exactly what the world thought. Clips of the takedown had already racked up millions of views. Talk shows debated whether David was a retired SEAL, a vigilante, or a company plant hired for PR. He was none of those things. He was just a man trying to stay invisible. By noon, his phone had 47 missed calls. Reporters, producers. A podcast host offering him a platform to tell his truth. A fitness supplement brand that wanted to sponsor him. He turned it all down. Except the last voicemail. From his mother. Her voice cracked as she said, "I saw what you did. I know you won't call back, but I just wanted you to know. Your father would have been proud." David stared at the wall for a long time. He didn't play the message again. He didn't need to. At the office, the tone had shifted. People he'd passed for 3 years without a glance now nodded, smiled, asked how his weekend was. One intern asked for a selfie. David refused politely. But Elena watched from a distance and knew it was starting to wear on him. She found him during lunch in the loading dock again, his back to the cinderblock wall, eyes closed, face tilted toward the light like someone trying to remember what peace felt like. "You okay?" she asked. He opened his eyes, offered a half smile. "Define okay." She sat beside him. "Famous yet." He chuckled once. Famous and unemployed might come next. She frowned. They wouldn't dare. David shrugged. "They already dared to scold me for doing the right thing. You think they're thrilled I made them look unprepared?" Elena was quiet for a beat. "They offered you something, didn't they?" He nodded. "Head of security." Her eyes widened. "That's a big step." "It's a leash," he replied. "Dress it up however you want, it's still about control. About putting me in a box with a label. You'd be good at it." David looked down. "That's the problem." That night, Noah sat on the couch scrolling through videos of his father on his phone. Interviews, breakdowns, even slow-motion replays with red arrows showing each movement of the takedown. David sat beside him quietly. "You mad people know about it now?" Noah asked. David didn't answer at first. "I'm not mad," he said eventually. "I'm tired. Tired of what being someone I'm not supposed to be." Noah frowned. "I don't get it." David turned to him, eyes soft. "I spent years hiding who I was thinking it was safer, easier, but when that man pulled the gun, I didn't think. I was that person again, and it scared me how natural it felt." Noah looked down. "It didn't scare me." David blinked. "You didn't look angry or wild. You just looked calm, like you knew what to do." David swallowed. "I used to know. Now I'm not so sure." Noah leaned his head against his dad's shoulder. "I am." The next morning, Elena found David waiting by the front entrance, not in a janitor's uniform but in a dark, collared shirt and jacket. Sharp, understated. "You clean up well," she teased. "I'm not here to clean today." She raised an eyebrow. "They asked me to meet with the board," he said. "To discuss next steps. And what will you say?" David looked past her out toward the morning sun. "I'll listen. I'll speak. But I won't change who I am just to make them feel safe." Elena stepped closer. "You don't have to." There was a beat of silence between them. Then she added, "Whatever happens in that room, you're not in this alone anymore." David met her eyes. For the first time, he believed it. The boardroom was all glass and glare. David stood alone at the far end of the table, hands in his pockets, the city skyline painting sharp reflections behind him. Opposite him, 5 suits waited. Some curious, some cautious, none comfortable. A man named Vernon, vice president of risk management, cleared his throat. "We appreciate you coming in, Mr. Hale." David gave a slow nod. "You didn't give me much choice." Vernon smiled tightly. "We see a unique opportunity here. You're not just an employee anymore. You're a symbol of courage, of readiness." David said nothing. "We'd like to offer you the position of Director of Security. 6-figure salary. Full team, your own office, immediate start." He waited. David didn't flinch, didn't blink, only asked, "What happens to the man who replaces me with the mop?" A beat of silence. "Pardon, the next janitor. Does he get trained? Backed up, or does he clean blood off the tiles and go home like nothing happened?" The room stiffened. David shook his head gently. "I'm not a symbol. I'm a man, with a son, with a life that works because I'm close to him, not locked in meetings and managing people who don't want protecting. So, Is that a no? David looked out the window. It's a thank you, he said quietly. But no. Later that afternoon, he found Elena in the hallway outside HR. She was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, watching him with that look she used when she was about to challenge him and when she was afraid to. You turned them down, she said. I did. I thought you might. Because I'm predictable. She shook her head. Because you're steady. David leaned back against the opposite wall. You say that like it's a good thing. It is. Especially when life keeps trying to knock you over. They walked together to the roof. No words for the first few minutes. Just footsteps and wind and the low hum of the city below. Finally, Elena said, I want to tell you something. David glanced sideways. I'm listening. She stopped walking. My ex-husband, he didn't hit me. Not once. Not with fists. But with silence. With shame. With words that made me smaller and smaller until I couldn't remember what it felt like to speak without apology. David turned to her face unreadable. She continued, voice steady. I stayed too long. For my daughter. For appearances. For all the wrong reasons. And when I finally left, I promised myself I'd never let anyone in again. David's throat tightened. And yet she added softer now, here I am. Standing on a roof with a man who says almost nothing yet somehow makes me feel seen. He stepped closer. Elena. She cut him off. Don't say anything. Not yet. Just be here. He was. They stood there until the sun dipped behind the neighboring building and left only the glow of possibility between them. The next morning, David woke to the sound of Noah making pancakes. Bad ones. Burned edges. Too much batter. Syrup spilled on the counter. But he was humming. David stepped into the kitchen, raised an eyebrow. You cooking for someone, or are you on strike? Noah grinned. Both. David poured coffee. Big day at school? Noah shrugged. Kinda. They asked me to talk in assembly. About you? David froze mid-sip. What'd you say? Noah looked up. I said no at first. Then I said yes. David sat down. You don't have to do that, kiddo. I want to. There was a long pause. Then Noah added, I told them my dad used to be a hero. And I think maybe he still is. David felt something sharp and warm twist in his chest. He looked at his son, really looked, and realized for the first time in years he wasn't just surviving fatherhood. He was living it. That night, Elena came over. No pretense, no reason. She brought Thai food and 2 beers and a small stack of Noah's forgotten library books. They sat on the couch legs brushing, watched a bad movie, laughed once, then fell into that quiet only people with history can share even if it's new. Halfway through the credits, Elena turned to him. I don't know what comes next. David looked at her. But I know I don't want to do it alone, she said. He reached for her hand. You won't have to. David had always believed some truths were better left buried, not because they weren't important, but because digging them up might break what little peace he'd managed to build. So, for years, he buried the memory, the sounds, the moment, until now. It was Sunday afternoon. Elena had offered to help Noah study for an upcoming science test. They were all in the apartment, warm lighting takeout on the counter, laughter so casual it almost felt like a family. Almost. But even in comfort, David carried a stillness. Like a man in the eye of a storm he knew would return. When Noah headed to his room to FaceTime a classmate, Elena poured 2 glasses of tea and sat beside David on the worn-out couch. You've been quiet, she said. He offered a small shrug. Lot on my mind. Elena tilted her head. David. You said once that you left the military after your wife died, that it was too much. He didn't answer. She continued gently. But something's been gnawing at me. The way you moved that day, the way you fought, that's not just a soldier's instinct. That's something deeper, closer. David stared ahead. I need to ask, she whispered. What really happened? He didn't look at her. Instead, he reached for the tea, took a long breath, and said, "She didn't die in a car crash." Elena froze. David's voice was low, barely above a breath. "That's what I told everyone. My unit, the neighbors, even my own parents. But that's not how it happened." Elena sat perfectly still. David closed his eyes. She'd been seeing someone else. A man I didn't know. Someone she met while I was deployed. I found out 2 days after I came home. I was angry, but not violent. I just shut down. I tried to move on. Focus on Noah. He swallowed hard. But one night, she came back to the house. It was late. She was drunk. She wanted to take Noah, said I didn't have a right to keep him from her. David's voice cracked now. She pushed past me. Got to his room. He was crying. She tried to drag him out. He clung to the bed frame, begging her not to take him. Elena's eyes glistened. I stepped in. I begged her to stop. She slapped me, said I was a coward hiding behind a mop and a kid. Then she grabbed a letter opener from the desk. David's hands trembled. She wasn't trying to kill me. I know that. But she wasn't in control. And when she turned toward him with that thing in her hand, I reacted. He looked down. I didn't even think. I just moved. A long silence stretched between them. "I struck her," he whispered. "One blow. Just enough to stop her." She fell, hit her head on the corner of the dresser. Elena put her hand over her mouth. David's voice dropped lower. She died 2 hours later in the hospital. Brain hemorrhage. The police ruled it self-defense, no charges filed. But Noah was there. He saw it. He saw everything. Tears fell silently down his cheeks now. I couldn't stay in the house. Couldn't bear the look in his eyes. I left the army. Took the first job that let me be close to him but far from the past. He looked up at her. "That's why I mop floors. That's why I disappear. Because I know what I'm capable of. When someone I love is in danger." Elena's heart broke not out of fear, but out of recognition. Because she knew that kind of pain. The kind you carry like a scar under your ribs. The kind that never quite stops aching. She reached for his hand. "You didn't fail him," she whispered. "You saved him." David stared at her, disbelieving. "And you've spent every day since proving to yourself that you didn't lose who you were." "But David, you never did." His breath hitched. "You don't need to be punished anymore," she said. "You need to be loved." And for the first time in years, he let someone hold him while he wept. Later that night, as rain whispered against the windows, Noah sat on the edge of his bed and called out, "Dad." David walked in. "You okay?" Noah looked up. "You were crying earlier." David paused. "Yeah, I was." Noah hesitated. "Is it about Mom?" David sat beside him. "I told Elena the truth tonight." Noah didn't speak. "I know you remember that night, and I want you to know. I'm sorry. For everything. For how it happened. For not explaining sooner." Noah was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I don't blame you." David turned to him, stunned. "I saw what happened," Noah whispered. "I remember it all. I didn't want to. But I do." His voice trembled. "And I was scared. Not of you. Just of how much pain we were in." He looked at his father. "But you stayed. You gave up everything just to be here. And you never let me go." David couldn't speak. Noah leaned in, hugged him tight. "You're my hero, Dad. Not because you fought, but because you never left." And in that moment something heavy lifted. Not forgotten, but forgiven. Spring arrived slowly that year. The kind of spring that didn't explode in color but whispered its way in one golden morning at a time. Buds on the trees outside the community center. A breeze that didn't bite. The subtle smell of grass returning to life. And David Hale finally looked like a man learning how to breathe again. He stood in front of a class of 12. Kids between the ages of 8 and 15, some fidgeting, others focused, all of them from neighborhoods where fear walked the hallways as freely as they did. Most had never taken a self-defense class. Many didn't speak much, but every single one of them listened when David spoke. His voice was calm, grounded, never raised. Your body is your shield. Your mind is your compass. And your story, he paused, is something no one gets to rewrite but you. A little girl in the front row raised her hand. Even if bad stuff happened, David knelt down to her level, especially if bad stuff happened. The room was quiet. Then one boy clapped. Then another. Then all of them. The center was part of a new outreach program Elena helped launch, the Haven Project. It wasn't about saving anyone. It was about equipping them to save themselves. David wasn't just an instructor. He was the blueprint. And in giving these kids something to believe in, he'd finally found what he never realized: he was missing a way to honor his pain without being ruled by it. Noah came every Tuesday afternoon. Not to learn self-defense, he already knew more than most of the instructors, but to help, set up mats, guide the younger kids. And sometimes when no one was watching, he'd glance at his dad with a kind of quiet pride that didn't need words. They had become more than father and son. They were partners in healing. Elena stopped by often, not as an executive, not even as the program's sponsor, just as herself. Some days she brought lunch. Other days she just watched from the doorway, arms crossed, heart full. David always noticed when she walked in, and each time he smiled a little sooner. One Saturday afternoon, as the last of the students filed out, Elena stayed behind. David was stacking training pads. She leaned against the doorway. "They love you," she said. "I think they just like the snacks." She grinned. "They trust you. That matters more." He looked at her, eyes warm. "You started this." "I just wrote the grant proposal," she said. "You gave it meaning." There was a pause. That quiet kind, heavy with something unspoken. Then David walked over, slow, steady. "You remember when you said I didn't have to do this alone?" Elena nodded. "I believed you," he said. "Still do." She swallowed. "Good. Because I was thinking—" He hesitated. "Maybe it's time we stopped walking around it." She tilted her head. "Walking around what?" This he said simply. "Us." A breath passed between them. Then she stepped closer and whispered, "It's about time." They didn't kiss. Not yet. But they stood together, forehead to forehead, like two people who had stopped running from the past, from guilt, from the walls they'd built so carefully. And for the first time in years, David didn't feel like a man trying to earn peace. He felt like a man who already had it. 2 weeks later, Noah came home from school with paint on his hands and a folded certificate in his backpack. He tossed it on the kitchen table and walked to the fridge like it was nothing. David picked it up. Community Kindness Award for empathy, courage, and mentorship. He looked at his son. "You didn't think this was worth mentioning?" Noah shrugged. "It's just school stuff." David smiled. "You're becoming someone I really admire." Noah glanced back. "I learned from the best." That weekend, they hosted a small dinner at the center, parents, students, volunteers. Nothing fancy, just warm lights, paper plates, and enough laughter to make the walls remember it. Toward the end of the evening, one of the younger boys tugged on David's sleeve. "Mr. Hale, yeah, buddy." The boy pointed to Elena standing across the room with Noah. "Is that your wife?" David blinked, then smiled. "Not yet." Later, as they locked up, Noah walked beside Elena and looked up at her. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." He hesitated, cheeks flushed. "Would it be weird if I called you Mom?" Elena stopped. Tears stung her eyes. She knelt to his level. "Only if you didn't mean it," she whispered. He hugged her before she could say anything else. And somewhere in that quiet embrace a new chapter began. David stood a few feet away, watching them, hands in his pockets, heart thudding. He didn't interrupt, didn't need to, because for the first time in his life, everything he loved was already right in front of him. As they stepped out into the cool night air, Elena looked up at the building, the one where this story started. The same building where David once mopped floors in silence, where people passed him like he was invisible. She turned to him. "You know," she said softly, "it's funny. What is back then you were on the floor below?" He smiled, and now she took his hand. Now she whispered, "You're exactly where you belong." Some heroes don't wear medals. They don't chase praise or power. They mop floors. They raise children. They choose love over fear. And sometimes, the man you least expect becomes the one who teaches us what strength really is. Because the floor below was never beneath us. It was holding us up all along. Sometimes life reminds us that heroes aren't always the ones standing in the spotlight. Sometimes, they're the ones quietly sweeping the floors, carrying invisible burdens, protecting others, while trying to protect their own hearts. David's journey is a reminder that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it shows up in the quiet promise to do better, to love deeper, to keep going, even when the world feels unbearably heavy. And maybe, just maybe, you've met someone like David in your own life. A single parent who gave everything. A neighbor who stepped in when no one else did. A stranger who showed unexpected kindness at the exact moment you needed it. Or perhaps you are that person braver than you give yourself credit for. If you've lived through a moment of courage or witnessed an act of quiet heroism, I'd love to hear your story. Drop it in the comments and share where you're watching from. Your story might be the light someone else needs tonight. And if this journey touched your heart even a little, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and tap the notification bell so you never miss another story filled with hope, healing, and humanity. Thank you, truly, for choosing to spend your time here with me. Your presence matters, your voice matters, and your heart, just like David's, has the power to lift someone up. Until next time, take care of yourself, and keep believing in the quiet heroes all around us.